What if I told you one of the smallest countries in the world has literally rewritten its own geography? Singapore is barely a red dot on the map, yet its position, its land, and even its coastline have been transformed in ways that shock geographers and fascinate world leaders. The question is, how did an island with almost no natural resources turn geography itself into its greatest weapon? Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because Singapore's story proves that size on a map means nothing compared to strategy. Singapore sits like a jewel at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. To its north, Malaysia. To its south, Indonesia. And all around it, one of the busiest waterways in the world, the Strait of Malacca. This tiny island measures just over 730 square kilometers today. But what makes it powerful isn't size, it's location. For centuries, ships traveling between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific have passed by Singapore. That meant trade, commerce, and a reason for the British to settle here in 1819. They didn't come for farmland or forests. They came because this spot controlled the gateway to Asia. Even now, about 1/5 of the world's shipping passes through these waters. Geography handed Singapore its first advantage: deep harbors and unbeatable access to global trade. But that strategic edge was only the beginning, because Singapore refused to let the limits of its land define its destiny. If you've ever lived in a place that felt too small to matter, hit the like button right now. Singapore's story proves you don't need endless land to have endless impact. When Singapore became independent in 1965, it was even smaller than it is today, around 580 square kilometers. That's less than half the size of New York City. Land was scarce and pressure was intense. Most countries just work with the land they've got. But Singapore? It decided to make more. Through an audacious process called land reclamation, Singapore expanded itself outward into the sea. Hills were leveled. Sand was imported from neighboring countries. Through an audacious process called land reclamation, Singapore expanded itself outward into the sea. Jurong Island, today an industrial powerhouse, wasn't even one piece of land originally. And here's the kicker. Singapore's land area has grown by nearly 25% since independence. Think about that for a second. A country that's small literally redrew its borders with human hands. But even as Singapore grew outward, what lay at its center remained surprisingly wild. Comment, future-proof, if you think building new land out of the ocean is one of the boldest survival strategies you've ever heard. When you picture Singapore, you probably imagine towers of steel and glass. But at the core of the island lies something far more primal. A central plateau rises gently, covered with dense forest. At its peak stands Bukit Timah Hill, just 164 meters high, but it's the tallest natural point on the island. Around it, Singapore has preserved more than 2,000 hectares of nature reserves. In fact, within the Bukit Timah, nature reserve grows more species of trees than in the entire North American continent. In the middle of one of the world's busiest cities, ancient rainforest still survives. This wasn't an accident. The government deliberately protected these spaces even as land pressure soared. Why? Because these forests shelter reservoirs, critical sources of fresh water in a country with no major rivers. Geography here isn't just scenery, it's survival. And beneath that greenery lies an even older story, the one written not by politicians or engineers, but by the earth itself. If you're surprised Singapore has rainforest in its center, drop a tree emoji in the comments. Beneath the skyscrapers, the highways, and the green canopy lies Singapore's true backbone, its bedrock. Unlike many islands in Southeast Asia, Singapore isn't just a patch of soft soil deposited by rivers. It's built on granite, some of it over 200 million years old. This ancient stone gives the island a strength and stability that made massive urban development possible. The Bukit Timah granite, for example, has been quarried for decades. It built roads, bridges, and even formed the base for Singapore's land reclamation projects. But there's a twist. While the central and western parts of the island rest on solid granite, the eastern side is dominated by softer, sandy soils. That means building in the east requires creative engineering, yet another example of Singapore turning challenges into innovation. So, under all the modern glamour, Singapore is literally standing on ancient volcanic history. Now, let's look up from rock to sky. Singapore sits almost directly on the equator, which means one thing: endless summer. Temperatures rarely dip below 25 degrees Celsius, and humidity clings to the air like a constant blanket. It rains on nearly half the days of the year, sometimes gentle, sometimes torrential. April is the wettest month, when rainfall can strike on 70% of days. Monsoon seasons sweep in twice a year, carrying heavy winds and storms. To outsiders, it might sound like paradise, but for Singaporeans, the climate is both blessing and burden. Water scarcity, in particular, has haunted Singapore for decades. With no major rivers and no aquifers, it relied heavily on imported water from Malaysia for much of its history. To solve this, the island engineered one of the world's most advanced water systems: rainwater catchments, desalination plants, and new water, high-grade recycled water. Singapore didn't just live with its climate, it mastered it. If you're still watching, prove it. Comment rain or shine below. Let's see who's toughest, the heat lovers or the storm chasers. Here's something that shocks most visitors. Despite being one of the most densely populated countries in the world, nearly half of Singapore is covered in greenery. This is no accident. In the 1960s, then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew launched the Garden City vision. The idea was radical: transform one of the most crowded islands on Earth into a place where nature and concrete could coexist. This wasn't just about aesthetics. Greenery cools the air, absorbs rain, and makes life bearable in the tropical heat. And here's the kicker: Singapore isn't slowing down. The new vision is a city in nature, where biodiversity thrives alongside people. Imagine otters playing in canals, wild hornbills flying over high-rises, and coral reefs thriving just off the coast, all within sight of downtown towers. Drop a plan emoji if you'd love to live in a city where nature isn't pushed aside, but pulled into everyday life. For all its victories over geography, Singapore faces a threat it cannot ignore: the ocean itself. Sea levels are rising, and few countries are as vulnerable. Nearly 1/3 of Singapore sits less than 5 meters above sea level. But remember, this is a nation that built itself out of the sea once already, and it's preparing to do it again. Billions are being invested in coastal defenses, seawalls, tidal gates, and an ambitious plan to build polders, low-lying areas protected by dikes modeled after the Netherlands. At Marina Barrage, a massive dam not only keeps seawater out, it doubles as a freshwater reservoir. So what do we learn from Singapore's geography? That a tiny red dot on the map can command the busiest shipping lanes in the world. That an island can grow itself by nearly a quarter through sheer willpower. That even in a sea of concrete, forests and rainforests can thrive. And that no matter how small you start, you can build resilience against the biggest threats the planet throws at you. Singapore isn't just surviving on borrowed land, it's redefining what land even means. And here's the thought I'll leave you with. In a century where coastlines are shifting and cities are drowning, maybe Singapore isn't the exception. Maybe it's the preview of what every coastal nation will one day have to become. If that idea surprised you, hit subscribe for more stories where geography, history, and human ambition collide. And before you scroll away, tell me in the comments, if your country had to fight the ocean tomorrow, would it be ready?